Greetings. Happy Monday. It's that time again. Midwife Monday here with me, Maryn, and we're going to have a great time. I don't know what's going to come out. I don't know what we're going to talk about exactly, but it was a very full Monday on my part. Some office visits. This is another view of the office, and some virtual stuff. So, kind of a lot of running back and forth between home and here, which is doable. So I feel grateful for that. Doable to go home and nurse the baby and come back. So let's see, what shall we begin with tonight? It's just 5 o'clock. So maybe I'll wait a couple of seconds, another minute or two, and see who hops on here and possibly what you're wanting to talk about. I feel like there's been a lot of great questions lately and conversation around midwifery and politics and licensing. And so I can totally go into some of that if people are wanting that. But I don't know. They're topics I've been talking about for a long time. So I'm never quite sure where new people are at, but I know there's also a need for that and just a review about things. So I put a blog post up today on Indie Birth and on our social that some of you read about the sweet and dear Carla Hartley, who passed from this world a couple of days ago, I believe. And yeah, it took me a few days to just kind of reflect on that and share it. So I did that in the blog post if you haven't seen it. But just to reiterate, if you haven't, and just because I think it is super important to talk about our ancestry in midwifery, the women that came before us and their powerful vision and their strength and what we learned from them, because we all will go that way eventually, and we all hopefully will leave some kind of legacy, whether it's birth related or, for our children. It's very humbling, isn't it, to just think about and see like such a great woman not be here anymore, but yet palpably feel her influence here on earth. And, I wasn't super close to Carla, to be honest. She was a mentor to me during the years that I was a student at her school, AAMI. And that was kind of the time period that I had getting to know her. And again, sharing in the blog post just her influence on me. I had a midwifery license for a couple of years here. And to be truthful, I had never questioned not having it. I had never questioned that until the universe presented me with a situation where I had to really decide to get clear. And so I'm so grateful to Carla for being the only one, literally the only one in my life at that point. And outwardly in like the world of midwifery that was openly speaking out against the dangers of regulation. And what I really love most about the perspective that she shared was the fact that she was most concerned with women. She was most concerned with their future and the future of their families, not so much with midwifery. And I totally agree. I don't think regulation, when you get down to it, is really about midwifery. It's about restricting human rights and women's rights. And if we focus on midwifery, we don't get anywhere, honestly. And I think we have the evidence to prove that. We have states all over the US where midwives could never agree. They could never agree on how to do it, right? When to do it, why to do it. And regulation is a perfect example of that. So you're always going to have people that don't mind the box and, have their belief system around what that box means to midwifery and birth, even midwives. There are people that are going to say it's safer, it's better. Those midwives are more educated, blah, blah, blah. And I don't even think I want to debate that. I know that's not necessarily true, but I think the debate for me has always been, due to Carla, more of a debate of my own rights as a woman. And the fact that if we continue to regulate, then women run out of choices. So we taught a workshop right here, this past weekend. Some of you were there. And we were lucky enough to attract more than 30 people to this office from all over the Southwest, largely, but from as far away as Wisconsin. That was really cool. And everybody sat here mask-free, which was another blessing. And really, I think, sat in a spirit of love and community and connection around these topics. So definitely a part of this new workshop, and we've been teaching the Indie Birth Workshop for 5 or 6 years, but this was a new version that Margot and I came up with sort of overnight. And this version, like the last version, definitely includes a section on politics. And it's not, again, a midwifery issue. It's not framed from that perspective of even, it being bad to be a licensed midwife. That's not at all what we're saying. I always say midwives are caring, loving people, usually, that love moms and babies, and it's not a personal thing. So what it really comes down to is, you as the woman, or maybe it's not you, maybe it's your sister, or it'll be your daughter or your granddaughter. Do you really believe that someone else should tell a woman what to do with her body? That's what regulation is. That's the question that got this close to many years ago when I decided to give my license back. It wasn't a matter of professionalization or any of these other things people want to frame it as. It was simply a matter of human rights and having a choice. So in the workshop, of course, predictably, we talk about those things. We talk about them transparently, and we hone in on some specific situations that very normal, healthy, pregnant women can run into, right? So VBACs, breaches, twins, long labors. It's a very basic list of situations that in most places will fall outside of licensed midwifery care. So I think that's all I'll say about that, unless people have any specific questions. But I'm all for options. So I don't need the licensed midwives to go away per se. I would love if they were more transparent and clear about their boundaries and about what they can and cannot do and who their loyalty ultimately is for and to. That would be really nice. But I think that's an actual legitimate and perfect choice for a lot of women who, if they understand the box that they're in, they might want to be in that box. A lot of people have this idea that birth is safer with X, Y, or Z outside of themselves, right? So unlicensed midwifery, which is also a terrible term, autonomous midwifery should be a choice for women everywhere. So that's where I'm coming from tonight. And again, just a blessing to Carla Hartley for all the work she did and the impact she made on so many people, and to her family, who I'm sure is mourning her loss. So along those lines, I did find a quick passage I thought I'd read from one of my favorite books, because it does speak to this issue of feeling fear and dealing with our own dragons and demons as we wrestle with this idea of following our own hearts, even when it falls outside of a system that we've largely grown up in and been indoctrinated in. So the book, Daughter, Drink This Water by Jaya John, who I adore. And if you're on Instagram, you need to follow him because he is amazing. And every single day he posts just absolute gold. And you will probably find a lot of resonance with him. So the whole book is gold, but I'm going to read just a paragraph or so, 2 paragraphs. And this is in the section called Truthfulness. Do you care more about making others feel comfortable or avoiding them being discomforted than you do about honoring your truth? In cultures that make comfort the highest priority, people are crippled in their ability to speak the truth. Comfort is an oppressor against truth. Your freedom and wellness require making truth a greater priority than other people's comfort, greater even than your own comfort. Let not your heart stories, your voice, be suffocated by people's expectation that you not discomfort them. You have the right to disrupt injustice and harm. You have a duty. Your natural love energy and your sincere presence may cause people to feel fear. They may misunderstand you to be the cause of their fear when what they truly fear is their own loving nature. Be encouraged. Your truth can help bring others back to their tenderness, back to their nature they have abandoned. Inspire souls to reclaim their soulfulness. Your fever is good to catch. She spoke and lived in her truth. Her soul responded by giving her peace. And it goes on, and it's all that beautiful and valuable, but just a little excerpt for tonight. I think someone like Carla had a lot of truth for sure in her words and her actions. And I think that's something that I've been inspired to continue talking about for sure. So these ideas of regulation and myths about and what makes birth safe, they're all super important and I think interesting and really valid right now in the world. I think we're definitely in a time where we're all being challenged. We're all being challenged to dig deeper than we have before and face all these parts of ourselves that are hard to look at. That's the work that I've kind of been doing. I won't lie. It's not the prettiest stuff that YouTube videos are made of, but it's the real stuff that brings us to why we're here, because, eventually we won't be. So I guess, do you want to live out your time in your truth, in your heart, or do you want to live out your time pleasing other people or being in a state of fear? And I don't have the answer for you. I just know where I'm at, and I'm very grateful for the lessons that have come my way where I've really had to honestly make a choice. Because sometimes you can just kind of keep thinking about it, all the good, all the bad, all the ugly, all the beautiful. But I, had to eventually make a choice. And this is the choice I made. So happy to be here sharing with you about autonomous midwifery largely and the path to getting there and what it looks like to be a midwife. So if you're just joining us, if you're new, that's what these Mondays are about. And they're also largely open for inspiration that comes my way and or questions from you. So don't be afraid to type anything or ask a question or pose a topic. I'll get to it, or maybe I'll just take it and run with it if it feels good, because I never really know. So moving on from that, let's see. Today was a very interesting and varied day, as these days seem to be. And since Monday is the main day that I'm doing midwifery, for lack of a better phrase, we get to see all kinds of things and talk to all kinds of people, postpartum to, newly pregnant people to people that are getting close to having a baby. And it was really sweet seeing some postpartum mamas today. And really the sweetest part of that, besides seeing the cute babies and weighing them and sort of catching up, is just hearing from them how their life has changed. And I guess being also having just left my last day, or I guess you could say first day out of the fourth trimester. Rumi is 3 months today. So I'm just myself out of that time. So maybe I have even, a closer understanding with how we all change during the birth process and our pregnancies. And it was really nice and poignant to sit today and hear that from people that have birthed recently. Women that have had babies, right? It doesn't matter. Who are they now? And I really think that's a beautiful open-ended question. And most women, I mean, I for one, couldn't really answer that at 6 weeks postpartum. In fact, I don't think I can answer it yet. So I don't expect an answer. It's more the posing of the question and the discussion and the invitation to share if they want around all the things that feel different and crazy and new, even if they've done it before. So that's always a very sweet part of this job, wrapping up care with people. Although we have a mama circle here once a month, so we always hope people come back and continue to share and receive support because it's so ongoing. There's something so medically minded about that 6-week postpartum visit. I've adopted it as well, but certainly, care and context seems to extend well beyond that as people need it. And that's also super important. I wish we were all in communities where a year's worth of postpartum care was something we could logistically and honestly offer. I don't feel like that is something I can offer to the extent I would want at this point. But perhaps in the future, when there are more midwives around and, whatever stars need to align to set up such a thing, since there's so much that happens in that first year. And yeah, we all need support doing it. So I'd love to hear people's questions, if you would. I'll give you a minute if you have any topics. Yeah, well, nothing is off topic at this point, Patty, so no need to apologize. It's kind of open forum. So Patty asks, have you ever had any clients that had previous placenta previa that went on to have successful home births? I don't know that I've supported someone that had a previous previa. So that would have been a C-section. So a VBAC mama who had a cesarean for placenta previa. I don't know, honestly, but I don't think that would really influence next pregnancy other than, sure, I mean, I guess it could happen again, but I think that's one of the very, very very, very useful instances of ultrasound, right? If you know anything about me and Margot and how we work and, the kind of stuff we're suggesting and promoting, ultrasound is not off the table. I think it's very, very useful in some situations. And I think looking at placenta placement is great. And I think for women that have had cesareans, I know if I work with someone that's planning a VBAC at home, I don't absolutely insist at this point, unless maybe they've had multiple cesareans. And then I think they're usually at a place too where, yes, they would like to see not only where the placenta is, but how the placenta is attached. I don't absolutely insist on it if someone's had one cesarean. I ask them to kind of feel into it and decide if that's something they need to know. And of course, with a true previa, you're probably going to have some warning signs there prior to birth. So not that you should only look for those, but things like bleeding and a baby in a really funky position might be clues. So, you could always follow up with an ultrasound. And I'm really fortunate to have an ultrasound tech that will come right here. So, no excuses if someone wants it. It's not hard to get and it's not hard to do. And he's really respectful and great and will only look at whatever someone wants to look at. So I'm all for it in instances like that. And I think even the peace of mind that that kind of scan can bring just quickly can really make the difference for someone. It is possible to have some idea that something is going on with the placenta, but I don't know that I would, you wouldn't be able to say 100% because of course, if you suspected a previa, you also wouldn't go sticking your hand up there. So signs of a previa would be bleeding. And like I said, a baby that is possibly in a funky position because they can't get in there. There's a placenta in the way. They're probably not going to be head down. And even if they were, they're not going to be engaged. So the baby might be breech or transverse, or it might just feel weird. There isn't like engagement, as we say. So it's not definitive. And in fact, I had a client once who had those two things going on. She had randomly some bleeding in pregnancy, which is very disconcerting, especially for the mom, right? Super upsetting. And she had a baby that was in the breech position. So she went to the hospital to get that checked out because that's nothing to play around with, especially if you're bleeding. But yeah, I suspected a previa, but it wasn't actually. It wasn't a previa. It was actually a placental abruption, so not fun. And that story actually ended up really well. She had a great home birth, if you can believe that. And there's a podcast about it if you want to hear that one. It's called A High Risk Home Birth. She had a lot going on, this beautiful woman, and it all worked out. So yeah, bleeding doesn't always equal a previa. Obviously, there's other reasons you could bleed as well. But no, I wouldn't say I would feel confident diagnosing that without ultrasound. In fact, here's another interesting tidbit now that you've got me on placenta land. Somebody asked me today, can you hear where the placenta is with a fetoscope? Yes, you can if it's anterior, right? So on the front, you can probably hear it. However, they did a study, and someone else would be better at digging this up than me, but something along the lines of determining placental location by midwives. And the short story is the midwives didn't do such a great job. So all's to say, it's harder than we think. And every sound we hear, I know a lot of people, especially if they're learning or they're students and they hear the mother's pulse and they're like, that's the placenta. No, it's not necessarily the placenta. There are uterine arteries, and believe it or not, it can be trickier than you think. So if you ever really want to know where a placenta is, again, I think that's a great use of ultrasound. And if it's just for fun, and if it doesn't matter, and you're sure it's not low, and there's not really a danger, and you're just interested, then you can try listening around anteriorly and see if you hear it. And if you don't hear it, then it's probably not anterior, or you're just missing it. But it can be fundal, so at the top of the uterus. It can also be posterior. So lots of possibilities with placentas. I don't. Hillary's asking, do I feel anterior placentas cause issues in birth? I want to know where that myth came from. And I'm not reprimanding you, Hillary. I think it's interesting because I've heard that before. But I don't know who started that. I don't know who started that. And I don't even know why that would be a thing. So I don't know the percentage of placentas that are anterior. If you're a research person, I guess go look that up. But in my own pregnancies, I feel like I've had probably half of placentas that I could actually feel. So listening is one thing, but you can actually palpate a placenta on certain people if you know what you're palpating for and if their body allows it. And I know my body, and I know when I feel a placenta. So no, it's not caused any issues. And again, my brain is reaching for what those issues would be. I had someone tell me that though, not long ago, a prospective client, a first baby who was told that by the birth center here. And she was all weirded out and was concerned. And I just was trying to understand why that would even be a problem. I have no idea. So a low-lying placenta, as we know, can be an issue. A previa is an issue, but a low-lying placenta can be uncomfortable for some people, the care provider. It can be uncomfortable to see that, and they can scare women into well, will it move or won't it move? And maybe you won't be able to do this or blah, blah, blah. But of course, as long as it's not covering the cervix and not super near, it's not really a thing other than that woman might have more bleeding after birth. She might. And I've definitely seen that just because of the way the uterus contracts, right? So that's, I don't think, a myth. Definitely can have more bleeding, but you're ready for that anyway, I guess, in certain cases or whatever. So I don't really think that's a contraindication for home birth either. And remember that, yes, there are benefits to ultrasound, and I've just talked about a few, so I'm obviously not anti-ultrasound. But of course, back in the day, people weren't looking at all these things. And for the most part, things work out. So I think with the increased cesarean rate, however, it makes sense to be looking when we think we need to. And yeah, for women that have had multiple C-sections, I'm all for it. So yeah, back to the anterior placenta. No, I think that's complete nonsense, honestly. And sure, there could be something I don't know there. There always is something I don't know. But no, that doesn't make any sense. I think, again, it comes back to this idea that we're scanning everyone. Even midwives, the midwives here that are licensed, it's a requirement of their licensing that the client get an ultrasound at some point and close to birth. They're so scared that if they can't see all the things, that's going to be the problem. So that may be a thing someone invented just by, I don't know, association. And as far as why would the baby be more posterior, I don't think it has any bearing. And that also is a whole separate thing, right? A lot of posterior babies come out super easy, quickest labors ever, and others do not. So I think it's all a bunch of nothing, sort of. Not that there aren't things to think about, but to make like these bigger associations and assumptions is how myths get started. So there should be a midwifery myth podcast at some point. So let me see here. No, again, I mean, I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding what the fuss would be about an anterior placenta. No idea. I mean, if someone's had a cesarean, then we want to perhaps double check that the placenta isn't over the scar, and if it is, how it's attached, right? But I've already talked about that. So I think that makes sense. But anterior in general, for someone that's never had a baby or, had 3 vaginal births, no, what does it matter? And a lot of placentas are. So I don't see how anybody came up with anything around that. But, if you have information, send it to me. I would love to look at it. I think midwives are guilty of a lot of myth passing on, though. And I said that in my blog post about Carla Hartley. The number one thing she taught me is to ask questions. So I'm glad you're asking them. And, I might ask myself this one further, but I think there's also, on the flip side of being diligent about asking questions, a lot of weird myth passing that goes with midwifery. And I can't speak to obstetrics, but to me, that's like probably what doctors do in the break room. They like make things up and then everybody does it and it becomes a protocol. Midwives do the same thing. So like, what other ones are there? Midwife myths. Yeah, it makes me think of like shepherd's purse causes clotting. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that that's true at all. And let's see, what was another one? I feel like I just heard it. Oh, I don't know. I mean, this isn't even a myth, but like checking for cord after birth or, when the head's up. Why do we do that? Why do midwives do that? Right? Carla Hartley, she's in my ear and got me asking a lot of those good questions years ago when, I wasn't really encouraged to ask them in my apprenticeship. And I didn't really see that the midwife I worked with was interested in changing her ways or asking herself, why do we do this thing? But I am. I love that. And certainly, I've changed over the years too. And I'm sure there's more things. There's more things I could question and change how I do it. Because if we just do things because people told us that's the way it goes, or, we heard this myth about blah, blah, blah. If we don't kind of like investigate it and figure it out for ourselves, we just hand it down, which is even weirder. So yeah, Why do people check for cord when the head is out? I don't know. I think it's some weird medical model, handover. I don't get it. Yeah, there's all kinds of myths. And, is it a myth or is it truth? Like, I'm not here to tell you that. I just know for me, the ones that have proven themselves to be myths. But I think there's definitely truths in some of like the old wives' tales, and the midwives' sayings. Something as simple as follow your gut, right? There's a elder midwife named Vicky who's been a mentor of mine, and actually I haven't talked to her in a while, but she was a licensed midwife in Florida for a long time. Probably find her on Facebook. But that was one thing she really kind of drilled into me, is follow your gut, follow your gut. There is no right, there is no wrong that anyone else is going to be able to tell you. And when you're working with women, you have to be able to trust your intuition. So lessons like that, sure, let's hand them down. I think that's very valuable. Cassidy says, my midwife said, don't let the sun set on a laboring mother twice. Again, can we really put all women into the same category? I don't think so. Someone asked me here at the workshop on Saturday what the longest labor was, because we show some videos of long labors. And I very confidently said it was Margot's. Margot's labor was 60 something hours. So, no, I don't think that's true. But what I do think is true is long labors need attention. So they're hard work, they're definitely hard work for the mom, as we know, but they're hard work for the midwife, they're hard work for the whole team to stay rested, to stay attentive and aware of, what might be happening. So in that way, yeah, I would definitely have more feelers up for a super long labor and not be letting things stack up. Just the long labor is one thing, but once other things start to compile, then you got to look at them honestly. And, it may not be a situation that's going to resolve. It may not be a situation that should be a home birth. And I'd say, I don't know, statistic wise, but of long labors, there's certainly a percentage that go that direction. Most are fine, especially first-time moms. Long labors are somewhat normal. There's the body doing it for the first time. There's sort of like emotional dystocias that happen quite often. So I wouldn't be scared just based on number of hours, but I would look at all the factors. And those long labors, they're hard, and I think they usually come to a head of some kind, no pun intended, right? They come to a point where the woman has to decide, is she going to do this? Can she do this? Does she want to do this? And go from there. I can't think of a long labor that didn't come to that point at some point along the way. And usually shortly after, there's a baby or there's a transport. So, no right or wrong there, but that's my spiel on long labors. Let's see. Yeah, Cassidy. That's awesome. So Cassidy says she transferred me at 48 hours, ended up pushing on the way to the hospital. Second baby, she transferred me again. Second day, I refused to go to the hospital, birthed at my in-laws' house. Yeah, awesome. That's a great example of whatever that was being normal for you in your process. And maybe her hang up on the time, was also not so comfortable, I would imagine. So if someone's like, oh my God, how many hours has it been? It's really hard to relax into your labor. So there's a lot of factors though. And ultimately, I think women know best. First time births, if it's not going to go that way, they usually know. And yeah, and if they don't, then we're happy to give some input. Any thoughts on why someone would stop being able to urinate for hours in labor and the bladder would start to bulge? Well, sure. Depends on probably where the baby's at, station-wise, and I do have my baby in pelvis over there. I'm feeling lazy though, I'm not gonna grab it. Yeah, so definitely, if the baby is kind of like in just the right spot in your body, in your pelvis, it can make it almost impossible to pee. And I would imagine that's very uncomfortable because, yeah, not being able to pee and having a distended bladder then also keeps a baby from coming down. So it's kind of a double whammy. And, catheters are great for those few times, and I've totally utilized them in a couple of labors. Um, and then, I know in one of my labors, I think it was Evers, she just was in a position that my bladder hurt. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it just hurt. And I had to pee the whole labor, and it was really uncomfortable. And I still don't really know why. I mean, she came out easily when it was time. Just angle maybe, or bruising of the bladder. I'm not really sure. So I think there's definitely a lot we don't know. I don't know why, Stephanie, it doesn't want to show people your comment. That is so weird. My labor is 50 plus hours home birth, no problem. First time vaginal birth after cesarean. Awesome, Stephanie. Yeah, and I think for the primary VBAC, or the first vaginal birth after cesarean, that can be really normal, because it's essentially the body's doing it for the first time. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to talk about birth times and labor times, I find sometimes, because a lot of it is so individual, and where you might start counting labor might not be where I might start counting labor. But overall, I'd say 50 hours, Lauren, you as well. That is fairly long. So all the power to you women for doing that. I've never had a labor that long. I mean, me personally. So I don't even know what that's like. But I've certainly been attending for a while, and yes, I feel like they're not as rare as the world wants us to think or see. But it's tough. Yeah, as I said, it's tough. And you really don't wish that on anyone, but we don't control how it all goes down, as I very well know too. And we don't know the path the baby needs. Yeah, I bet. I can think of one long labor I was at, and this is a very nice story. First baby, and yeah, just long. And it was the kind of thing where it started off so intense seeming that it was shocking to everyone that it was so long. And there were some things that happened, like her water's open and there was a little bit of meconium, and just like, she wasn't worried at all, which is always a great thing. The baby sounded great every time we listened. And anyway, she kind of got to the end and she ended up wanting to be checked, which we don't do a whole lot, but certainly, it's useful. And her baby's head was right there, again, I need my pelvis, but like right at 0 station, which is where like our little spines are. So a baby engaged in there. And she kind of stayed that way for a lot of hours. In fact, Dava was a baby, and Dava was sleeping in the back room. And I remember going to rest with her. It was overnight. And when she woke up in the morning, she was needing encouragement for sure. I think she ended up having a chiropractor come over, and a chiropractor worked his magic, whatever it was, energetic, physical, and he left and she pushed the baby out. And those are the kind of situations that I think the medical world just doesn't understand, because they're like, well, you're 10, so just push the baby out. Or your baby's at 0, just push the baby out. But that's not the way it works. She wasn't ready. The baby wasn't ready in all of the ways, emotional, spiritual. So it was a very triumphant story. She was very proud of herself. Her husband was so thrilled because he kept saying, I knew you could do it. I knew you could do it. But it was very long. And, to have that amount of time at that point in labor isn't the most typical. I mean, if you were in a hospital, they just make you push the baby out or vacuum the baby out or something. So home birth teaches us a lot. So, Honesty, hello, I'm wearing your earrings. Look at these beautiful earrings Honesty made me. Isn't that fantastic? They're so light and beautiful, and our indie birth spiral, so sweet. Thank you. Okay, so Honesty says, I don't know if this is a myth or fear. I've heard a lot of my labor never started on its own, and sometimes women need help to start labor. Why does this come up? They are so beautiful. Thank you. I know. And I love light earrings. I love earrings in general, so I'm feeling like just so proud of these. Okay, well, I think that's myth. I think that's myth. In all of these years of doing this with hundreds and hundreds of women, I have never had anyone who didn't start labor. Never. It's never happened. So I think it's a myth. I think what is actually going on is what you would probably guess, most of you, all of you, which is people don't understand how the labor process works. So I said at the workshop this past weekend, labor is not an event. It is a process. It is a journey. We don't just like switch a thing on the wall and we're in labor. I mean, it might feel like that to some people, for some births for sure, but I can promise you there is tons of stuff going on inside of our bodies, chemistry, hormones. We all know if you've been pregnant, there's a ton of stuff going on emotionally. So it is not a flip the switch event. And if that is what people are anticipating, then it's easy to feel like you're going to be pregnant forever. So I won't lie, when you have women that you're working with that go past their dates, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, occasionally 43 weeks, it is kind of a mind fuck, to be honest, right? It is for them. And a lot of you could speak to that more personally than I can. I'm not a post-date person myself, but supporting someone in that space is a mind trip. It's crazy. You have to just kind of get in a bubble about it and, be able to reach outside of the bubble for practicalities and the what ifs if you're the midwife. But you have to stay sort of in this confident bubble that women have babies. They always have, they always will. And, checking in. How is she feeling? How is she doing? Is she eating? Is she resting? Is there anything she wants to talk about? So that's all of the work that goes into post dates that most women don't know is a thing. They don't know post dates are allowed. They probably don't have someone to really support them in that. And they're being met with so much fear, like you're saying, this myth is real in the medical world. They think there's an expiration date on a pregnancy. So if they're inducing X number of people and such a high percentage, then yeah, their myth becomes reality to them. And suddenly women aren't going to labor on their own. What do you know? They need help. They need Pitocin. They need this. They need that. But in all reality, as our bodies were made, I don't think that's a thing. I think there again are different gestation, appropriate ranges for people. Like if your mom went to 42 weeks with all of her pregnancies, you're probably going to do the same. That's been my experience. Sometimes dates are wrong. So there's all of these things. And the regulations around birth, I think, are really relevant in this conversation because there's tons of women, even in midwifery care, that are being told this. You're never going to go into labor. You better do some castor oil because if you don't, on Thursday, I'm going to have to transfer your care. So blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so what is the normal? I mean, I agree. I think 40 is the average from what I've seen. But in well-nourished, healthy people, we certainly see at least 10 days past the due date, if not more. And again, we have women that we're working with that aren't relying on ultrasound for dating. So there's a little bit of like we don't even know. Yeah, many women don't have an average cycle. Gosh, this is a crazy story. I had a client a couple of years ago who was pregnant with her second. Her first was a hospital birth, and so she was planning a home birth. And she gave me dates to start with, like everyone does. And they seemed fairly accurate, but I don't know. I mean, sometimes you really, you could go 2 weeks in either direction and it's not going to feel a whole lot different. And long story short, I think she was due in July and she did not have a baby in July. And she just kept being pregnant and kept being pregnant and kept being pregnant. And I ended up going out of town in August. I was not available. So she had her baby with another midwife here. And that's all great. But anyway, yeah, so she says to this day she was 44 weeks. And I'm not going to argue with her. I mean, practically speaking, I think there's a very rare percentage that probably go a month over because she didn't with her first, but it's kind of not my business completely. I mean, women give you dates and you work with them as best you can. And if they're wrong, they're wrong. And they kind of have to deal with being in that space. And I know it was hard for her that whole month. So whether or not she was 44 weeks, I don't really know, but it all worked out great. And she has a great story to tell. Let's see. So if labor is lengthy and there seems to be signs that a baby is posterior, asynclitic, etc., how do you feel about using exercises or releases to create balance or space for baby to shift? Yeah, that's and Laurel, I will get to your question because sorry, my eyes just went to the end of the screen. I will. So I won't be too lengthy on this one, Angela, but I think there's, always more to talk about and learn. So we could do that some other time. But in short, malpositions are common-ish. And I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding about what any of it means. So I'm not saying you misunderstand, but sort of collectively. For example, an asynclitic head is normal at a certain point in labor, just the way the baby enters the pelvis. So if we're doing a ton of vaginal exams and we're not quite clear on all of this, then a lot of things sort of present as pathology when, if you're not doing a lot of vaginal exams and things are kind of moving along, you obviously don't have that internal information. But in other words, you don't really know. You don't really know what the baby's trying to work out, because I think a lot of babies are trying to work things out. And it's for all the reasons. I mean, just pelvis and baby and our alignment and water's open or not. There's so many things. So I trust the baby to navigate the pelvis. And as you mostly all know, I just had my own birth where my baby had to figure it out. Wasn't fun. It wasn't comfortable. And I don't know why he was doing what he was doing. But he did work it out. So I've never gotten terribly obsessed or upset about positioning, especially prior to labor. I've had posterior babies in my pregnancies for almost all of them. I don't freak out if someone does. I think there are things to talk about. And in labor, truly, it can be hard to define that 100%. It can be really hard, because babies can be kind of twisted in there too. So unless you're super sure about head position, which again can be challenging when you don't do a ton of vaginal exams, a lot of it's a guess. So I do think there are exercises, rebozo using and sifting and, all kinds of positioning and things we can have moms try when they have a long labor, whether or not we know exactly what the baby is doing, because probably with a long labor, even if it's a first baby, there's something that's not aligned. That's how I think of it. It's the stars just aren't aligned yet. And as I said, I think a lot of it can be emotional. So we're kind of looking at all the pieces, but why not? If she's open to try this position, try that. It gets to be just, she usually wants to try something if it's a long labor. And I found that those kind of things seem to correct the problem most of the time. And, on the other side of that, when babies get wedged in there super weirdly, and maybe it's a first baby, and they transport to the hospital, They're often cesareans, honestly. So I don't know. It's probably because they're not as willing to have people shift position there and all of that good stuff. But it does happen. I think occasionally babies can get in there in such a way that they really are having a difficult time coming out. I mean, I've had enough babies that I think that's probably why Rumi came out. If it was my first baby, I don't know that I would have been so sure. Sometimes it just happens. So yeah, sure. Curb walking, stair walking, just movement. What does Gail Tully say? I think it's her, right? If you can't move the baby, move the mom. So that's always a great thing to keep in mind. But again, I don't think you have to know exactly what the malposition is in most cases. You just can try the things. And also, if you're able to do vaginal exams, then you're really trying to assess where the baby is in the pelvis. And I know Gail talks about that in spinning babies. And that's actually the part of spinning babies that I felt is really valuable. Not so much the exercises, but the understanding of station and where the baby's head is at and what to do with that. And, getting practice feeling those things. So that's a really long explanation. So preeclampsia is not something that people are predestined, I don't think, to have, and they're definitely not meant to repeat it. That's my 2 cents. But I'm sure, on the other side, always there's going to be women out there who are like, I had preeclampsia 5 times in a row. Like nothing stopped it, nothing prevented it. So I don't know about that, because I think in midwifery care, we are pretty good at working with healthy people. So truth be told, I don't run into a lot of people that have preeclampsia in my own practice. In fact, I was just saying today to a woman that Margot and I did our statistics last year, and we didn't have one. We didn't have one case of preeclampsia in like hundreds and hundreds of births. So nothing about us. It's just women are healthy, and we're paying attention to them and their diets. And, part of it is probably luck, because I do think there is an element of preeclampsia, or many, several elements that aren't necessarily nutritionally based, right? There's lots of theories about how placentas, implant and develop, and how that influences the development of preeclampsia. So I always say to people, I would never expect you to get that. And if you are at risk for it, then we're going to work really hard on your nutrition, because why not? I mean, it doesn't hurt to do that. And that same podcast I mentioned already, it's called A High Risk Home Birth. That woman, she's such a great woman. You have to listen to it if you haven't. So she had her 6th baby at home, and I was there, but her first 5 were all induced at the hospital. And I can't quite remember right now, but she had HELLP syndrome once, which is like horrible. You never want to see that in anyone ever. And maybe preeclampsia with another one. Anyway, she had a very complicated history, but with her 6th baby, yeah, it worked out to be at home. So yeah, it's not this sentence to have preeclampsia with all of your babies, but certainly it seems like some women might be predisposed to it for all the reasons that we understand and we don't understand. In fact, this woman who I'm talking about, the one who's on the podcast, her mom, I think her mom and her sister maybe had preeclampsia. So, I think there's definitely like a genetic component or things we don't understand. However, most women, many women are perhaps not nourishing themselves in the way that's needed for their pregnancy. And the Brewer diet is great, but it's also so highly individual, and we have liver function to look at and kidney function, and it's kind of a rabbit hole. Along those lines, years back when I was a student in Indiana, I was pregnant, and there was a woman in town who I met was pregnant, and she was working with one of the midwives I was working with. So we were kind of pregnant at the same time. And she was like one of the healthiest people I had ever met. She lived on a farm. She, milked her own cows and had her own chickens and was like Weston Price all the way. She ate fabulously. And she not only developed preeclampsia, but she developed it like on the early side. So less normal, like 29, 30 weeks, and had a cesarean. and was very sick, like was very sick. So it wasn't like maybe she has preeclampsia because her blood pressure was up. She was having all of the full blown symptoms. So it was definitely a good call. And I've never heard of anything like that since. So I don't understand, but it definitely was humbling because as much as we think we know, we really don't know anything. So yeah, I mean, certainly diet is the first place to start. And again, brewer, yes, but really individualizing it as much as possible and looking at someone's whole life as much as you can, their whole lifestyle and everything. And whatever, sort of like emotional, spiritual issues come up with preeclampsia are definitely something cool to look into. Same with high blood pressure. And that was something I was going to talk about, but maybe I'll save that for next time. So, any last questions before we go? Yeah, that's so cool. Angela says, I had a friend that had pre twice in a row and then switched to home birth and did the brewer's diet. Full term, healthy baby number 3. Awesome. Yeah, and honestly, I think that is, a very large percentage. Also, the diagnosis of preeclampsia is somewhat sketchy if you didn't know. So it's not just high blood pressure. It's not just high blood pressure and protein. It's really an entire clinical picture of someone being unwell in all the ways. And some of those signs might be there and some of them might not. So truly, I think if someone's going to actually be labeled that way, they, in my opinion, should have had some more conclusive testing than what a lot of doctors are doing or, whoever, where they're just like slapping that label on people and wanting to induce them. And women don't necessarily know any better to ask questions, or they think, oh God, my blood pressure's up. I guess I have this thing. They don't really kind of dig deeper. And before you know it, it's an induction and the baby's out. And then you can't really tell anything at all. Yeah, again, like the podcast I mentioned, there are women for sure that have had they've had help. They've been very sick and they go on to have completely healthy pregnancies. And I know for me in working with this woman, so she had 5 and I was helping her with the 6. She's also a nurse. And so she's in the medical field. She knows her body, but she had been sick. So I don't love that. I don't wish that on anyone. But she had that knowing in her body. She actually knew what it felt like to have one of these very pathological pregnancy diseases. So I completely trusted her that she would know. She would know if she was sick. And she did also continue to do lab work so that she could see it on paper. But she didn't get sick and she had a great birth. So, you never know. And it works all kinds of ways. And people that seem completely healthy, maybe sometimes they aren't, and vice versa. It's so much unknown. So I think the value of midwifery care is obvious. Just keeping probably better tabs, not even probably, like definitely keeping better tabs on people's health and in knowing them in all of the ways that we can makes a big difference. There's another podcast about a woman who had eclampsia, not a client of mine, but a woman I interviewed. And that was really informative because I don't ever need to see anyone with eclampsia. No, thank you. But this woman had experienced it and definitely went on to have healthy babies. I think she even had a free birth or 2. So it was just this one pregnancy. And the doctors completely missed it. They completely missed it because her blood pressure wasn't crazy. It just was elevated for her. But she didn't have enough, attention on her as an individual for anyone to pick that up before it became full-blown eclampsia. So, paying attention, certainly getting numbers and lab work, those kind of things are super appropriate in midwifery care if someone has a history or if they want them or if other signs appear. It's not just a sit back and hope everything works out kind of thing, even though most women are very healthy and don't need or want any of those things. Some do. And I think that's a challenge of midwifery that is very creative. So, not that I want complicated cases. And I definitely think there are cases outside of what midwives should probably be dealing with. And we all have our individual boundaries for that. But definitely, there are things that crop up just in normal client care that we have to learn how to navigate and we have to learn how to deal with and problem solve. And I think that makes it really fun. And hopefully, the problem solving leads to a great outcome and a great birth. So, on that note of weird things and diseases that happen in pregnancy, I'm going to go and get back home to my baby. But thank you all for watching tonight. And yes, as always, let me know your questions. It was really nice to have kind of a discussion with those of you that were here. So thank you all for commenting and sharing your stories and asking questions. It makes it so much more fun. It ends up, feeling like the time just flies by and I'm not like scrambling in my brain for something weird to talk about. It all feels much more natural. So hit me up for topics, and if not, I will see you here anyway, and I'll have something to say. All right, everybody, have a great night, and I'll see you next week.